The purchase. Dust rose in lazy swirls across the cattle auction yard, clinging to sweat-stained hats and the cracked leather boots of desperate men. Ethan Cole stood among them, his arms crossed, his jaw set in a line that spoke of too many debts and not enough sleep. The ranch weighed on him like a yoke he could not shed. Years of drought and failed harvests had hollowed him out, leaving only grit and the stubborn pride that kept him standing. He had come for livestock, not trouble. A few heifers, maybe a sturdy mare, something to patch the bleeding edges of his ranch. But trouble found him all the same. A ripple of uneasy murmurs moved through the crowd as a figure was led forward. Not cattle, not horse, but a woman. Shackled by reputation more than rope, her wrists bore no iron. Only the mark of defiance in the way she held her chin. Isa Reyes, the auctioneer announced, his tone caught between disdain and weary amusement. Some call her Isa, some call her unbroken. Most call her too untamed for decent company. The men laughed, a rough, guttural sound. Ethan didn't, his eyes fixed on her. Isa stood barefoot in the dust, long dark hair wild around her shoulders, her gaze sharp enough to cut through the heat. There was no shame in her bearing, only fire, a dangerous kind that burned against the cage of expectation. She looked more like a creature of the open range than a woman to be sold. The auctioneer kept talking, spinning her story like bait. She'd run from every man who tried to claim her, fought them, outlasted them, never yielding. Too wild for town, too costly to keep, a liability no one wanted. Ethan felt something stir in him. Not desire, not yet, but recognition. He saw in her the same rebellion that sparked in untamed horses, the kind that either broke a man or carried him farther than he'd ever dreamed. "Do I hear 50? The auctioneer barked. Silence. No one raised a hand. 40. More silence, broken by a cough and a scoff. Isa smirked, as if daring the world to leave her there. Ethan's hand rose before his mind caught up. The crowd shifted, curious now. 30. The auctioneer called, his eyes flicking to Ethan. Ethan nodded once. And just like that, she was his. When he led her to the wagon, Isa's laugh rang out, low and amused. "You didn't buy a mare today, rancher. You bought a storm." Ethan gripped the reins tighter. Storms can be weathered. Her smile deepened, dangerous and knowing. Not this one. The ranch lay quiet when they arrived, sun sinking low, painting the fields in gold. Margaret stood on the porch, her apron dusted with flour, her posture straight as a fence post. She had the look of a woman shaped by duty, refined hands cracked by work, eyes dulled by years of survival beside a man who loved the land more than laughter. When she saw Isa climb down from the wagon, her expression faltered, confusion first, then something sharper, hidden behind the politeness she always wore like armor. "Ethan," she said, voice steady. "What is this?" Ethan cleared his throat. "Help. She'll work the horses. She knows their ways." Margaret's gaze flicked to Isa, measuring her with quiet judgment. Isa returned it without flinching. "You brought another mouth to feed when we can barely feed ourselves?" Margaret asked, her voice soft, almost fragile. "She'll earn her keep," Ethan said, more gruffly than intended. He avoided his wife's eyes, focusing instead on the barn where shadows stretched long. Isa walked ahead without being told, her bare feet silent against the dirt. At the corral, the Mustangs stirred, restless. One, a fiery chestnut stallion, reared at the fence, untouchable for months. Ethan had nearly given up on breaking him. Isa approached slowly, hand outstretched. The stallion's ears flicked back, muscles taut. Yet when her palm brushed his muzzle, he stilled. The wild fire in him mirrored the fire in her, and for a breathless moment, they were one. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Awe. Margaret watched too, her face unreadable, but her hands twisted in her apron until the fabric bunched. Isa turned to Ethan, eyes glinting in the fading light. "Told you, rancher. Storms don't bow. They ride with you, if you're strong enough." Ethan held her gaze, his chest tight. Margaret's voice broke the silence. "Dinner's ready," she said, turning sharply toward the house. Isa smiled faintly, the kind of smile that promised both danger and salvation. Ethan stood between them, the wife he had built a life with and the untamed woman who had just walked into his world like fate itself. And for the first time in years, he felt the ground shift beneath his boots. Sparks in the dust. Morning broke over the ranch in a blaze of gold, the kind that promised heat before noon. Ethan rose early, as he always did, but found Isa already in the corral, her hair loose, her bare feet sending up puffs of dust as she worked the chestnut stallion. The horse danced beneath her firm yet fluid command, half wild but listening, bending to her rhythm as though they shared the same heartbeat. Ethan leaned against the fence, silent, watching. He had seen men thrown from that stallion, bones cracked and pride shattered. Yet Isa rode him without saddle, gripping only with her thighs and balance, laughing as the animal fought and yielded all at once. Margaret stepped quietly beside Ethan, carrying a basket of eggs. Her eyes followed Isa, but where Ethan saw wonder, Margaret saw intrusion. She set the basket down harder than necessary. "She belongs more to those horses than she ever will to this house," Margaret said. Ethan's jaw worked. "She's useful. We need her." Margaret's voice softened, edged with something brittle. "We need each other, Ethan. Or have you forgotten?" He turned away, guilt pressing like a stone in his chest. By midday, the air shimmered with heat. Ethan and Isa worked side by side, repairing a broken fence. Isa's hands, raw from rope burns, moved with relentless energy. Sweat darkened her shirt, but her smile never faltered. She seemed alive in the labor, thriving where others complained. "You drive nails like a man," Ethan remarked, half a smile tugging his lips. "And you watch like one," she shot back, eyes flashing with mischief. He coughed, caught off guard. "I wasn't." "You were," Isa interrupted, grinning. She handed him another plank. "Don't worry, rancher. I've been watching my whole life. You're not the first." Something tightened in Ethan's chest. There was no shame in her words, only defiance, as though she dared him to deny the pull between them. Later that week, a wagon rolled into the yard, Tom Avery's. Ethan stiffened as the neighbor stepped down, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the smug confidence of a man who never feared hunger or debt. "Cole," Tom drawled, tipping his hat. "Heard you've been struggling. Thought I'd stop by, see if you needed a hand." His eyes flicked briefly to Margaret on the porch. His smile lingered too long. Margaret flushed and looked away. Ethan bristled. "We manage fine." Tom said, unconvinced. Then his gaze slid to Isa, who leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed, her stare cool and unyielding. "And this must be your new investment." "She works," Ethan said flatly. Tom's grin widened. "So I see." Isa didn't flinch under his scrutiny. Instead, she turned her attention back to Ethan, as though Tom were nothing but a shadow. Ethan felt the heat of her regard, sharper than Tom's provocation, more dangerous than his rivalry. When Tom finally left, Margaret lingered at the edge of the yard, her shoulders stiff. "He offered kindness," she said quietly, "and you bit his hand." Ethan answered gruffly, "That man doesn't know the meaning of kindness." But he saw how Margaret's eyes followed the trail of dust Tom's wagon left behind. He saw how her lips pressed together in thought. That night, the ranch lay silent except for the restless murmur of horses. Ethan stepped outside, the moonlight silvering the fields. He found Isa near the corral, seated on the fence rail, her legs swinging idly, her face turned toward the stars. "You don't sleep?" he asked. "Not when the sky looks like this." She tilted her head. "Where I grew up, the stars were all I owned. They can't be caged, no matter how many men tried." Ethan moved closer, the boards creaking beneath his boots. "And yet you're here." Isa's smile was faint, almost sad. "I'm always somewhere for a while. Never long. Too many chains waiting." He studied her, the light tracing her cheekbones, the curve of her mouth. The wildness in her eyes stirred something restless inside him. "You think I'll chain you?" he asked. I think you already want to. Her voice was soft but sharp, cutting straight to the truth he refused to name. Ethan's breath caught. He wanted to deny it, but the words stuck. Silence stretched, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Then Isa slid down from the rail, brushing past him. Her shoulder grazed his arm. Just a touch, accidental in form, but deliberate in impact. She whispered as she passed, "Careful, rancher. Storms don't warn before they break." Inside, Margaret stirred awake in the empty bed, reaching for Ethan's warmth and finding only cold sheets. Her hand lingered there, pressed to the absence. Outside, Ethan remained rooted where Isa had left him, the night humming with temptation. The storm had not yet broken, but its pressure built with every breath. And deep down, Ethan knew he wanted it to. The storm breaks. The sky darkened long before sunset, clouds rolling heavy across the horizon. By dusk, thunder shook the valley and rain came down in wild sheets. Ethan cursed as the Mustangs cried out, panic rising in the corral. He grabbed his coat, already soaked, and ran into the storm. Isa was there before him. Lightning lit her figure, hair plastered to her face, clothes clinging to her body, eyes alight with a feral joy as she fought to steady the horses. She moved among them like she was born of thunder herself, fearless, commanding. "Get the gate," she shouted over the roar. Together, they herded the animals back into shelter, shoulder to shoulder, mud sucking at their boots. Every brush of her arm against his felt electric, every glance charged with something more dangerous than the storm itself. When the last stallion was secured, they staggered breathless into the barn. Rain drummed against the roof, the air sharp with the scent of wet hay and sweat. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside raged, but inside, silence pulsed like a heartbeat. Ethan's chest heaved, his shirt plastered against his skin. He looked at Isa, her lips parted, hair wild, eyes fixed on him. It was too much. He stepped forward. She didn't retreat. Their mouths met with the force of something long denied, all restraint shattering in an instant. His hands tangled in her soaked hair, hers pressed against his chest, pulling him closer as if she'd been waiting forever. The kiss was not tender. It was hungry, desperate, reckless. "Ethan," she whispered against his lips, a warning and an invitation all at once. "I can't," he began, but her hand silenced him, sliding up his neck. "You already have," Isa breathed. The storm outside thundered, drowning out the world. They sank into the hay, the barn their only witness. Every touch ignited fire where there had only been ashes, every gasp tearing down the walls he had built around himself. For one night, there was no debt, no duty, no wife waiting in the house. Only the wildfire of a love he was never meant to claim. When it was over, silence pressed heavy. Isa lay beside him, her eyes glinting in the faint light. She did not smile, nor did she look ashamed. "You think this changes everything," she said softly, "but it only shows what was already broken." Ethan sat up, guilt flooding back as reality returned. Margaret's face rose in his mind, her patience, her quiet devotion, her loneliness. Shame twisted his gut. "This was wrong," he muttered. Isa's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe, or maybe it was the first honest thing you've done in years." He turned away, unable to bear her certainty. Back at the house, Margaret paced the kitchen, the storm echoing the turmoil inside her. She had waited for Ethan, listening to the rain, listening to the silence stretch too long. When he finally entered, drenched and disheveled, her heart clenched. "You were gone too long," she said, her voice trembling. "Where?" "With the horses," Ethan answered too quickly. Margaret studied him, her eyes searching for truth. She saw the flush on his skin, the restless shift of his stance. Her stomach twisted. "You're lying," she whispered. Ethan froze. The storm outside cracked like a whip. The following days carried a strange stillness. Ethan threw himself into work, avoiding Margaret's gaze, avoiding Isa's touch. But desire, once awakened, could not be buried so easily. Every glance at Isa rekindled the fire. Every silence with Margaret deepened a rift. Tom Avery visited again, drawn by the scent of weakness. He found Margaret alone by the porch, her face pale with sorrow. "You deserve more than this," Tom murmured, his voice smooth. "More than a man who leaves you in the rain." Margaret's breath hitched. She wanted to deny it, but Ethan's absence still clung to her like a wound. Inside the barn, Ethan watched Isa brush the stallion, her hand gentle yet firm. She looked up at him, eyes daring, lips curved in a smile that spoke of shared secrets. The storm had broken, but the aftermath promised to be far worse. Ashes of desire. The storm had passed, but the ranch carried its silence like a wound. The air was clearer, the earth damp, yet between the three of them, Ethan, Margaret, Isa, something had shifted beyond repair. Margaret's eyes had grown sharp in those days after the storm. She said little, but her silence was a verdict heavier than any shouted accusation. Ethan felt it each time she set a plate before him without looking. Each night, she turned her back in bed. He wanted to speak, to confess, but his tongue turned heavy with cowardice. One evening, Margaret broke the silence. "How long?" Her voice was soft, but it cut sharper than a blade. Ethan froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. "What?" Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "Don't treat me like a fool. How long has she had you?" The words struck him like a lash. Guilt swelled in his chest until it nearly drowned him. "Margaret," her hands trembled on the table. "You could have loved me once. Instead, you saved your fire for her." Ethan had no answer. His silence was confession enough. Isa lingered in the doorway then, the lantern light casting her shadow long against the wall. She didn't flinch under Margaret's gaze, nor did she hide. "It wasn't about stealing," Isa said quietly. "It was about reminding him he's still alive." Margaret's lip quivered. "And what does that make me?" "The cage." Neither answered. The truth had already named itself. The following morning, Tom Avery appeared, his wagon wheels grinding over damp soil. He dismounted with the air of a man who smelled opportunity. "Margaret," he greeted, his tone almost tender, "you shouldn't have to endure this. Come with me. I can give you the life you deserve." Ethan bristled. "She's my wife." Tom's gaze was cool, dismissive. "A wife you betrayed." He turned back to Margaret, softening his voice. "Leave him. You be free of his lies." Margaret looked between them. The man who had built her a life of hardship, and the man who offered ease but no certainty of love. Her hands clenched at her sides. "You both talk about me as if I'm some prize to be won." She drew herself tall, her voice steady now. "I am no one's prize. Not yours, Tom. Not even yours, Ethan." Tom faltered and used a refusal. Margaret walked past him into the house, the slam of the door echoing finality. That night, Isa packed her small bundle. Ethan found her in the barn, slipping the rope over the stallion's neck. "You're leaving," he said, though it wasn't a question. Isa didn't pause. "This was never meant to last. You love me in fire, but not in daylight. And I won't live in shadows." He stepped closer, desperate. "You think I don't care?" "I think you care too much about chains," she answered, her eyes burning into his. "You want freedom, but only when it doesn't cost you everything. That's not enough for me." Her words struck deeper than Margaret's anger, because they rang with truth. He wanted both his wife's stability and Isa's fire, but no man could ride two horses forever. "Stay," he whispered. Isa smiled, a sorrowful curve of lips. "You don't ask me to stay. You ask me to be less. And I never will." She mounted the stallion with ease, her figure framed against the pale moonlight. For a moment, she looked like the very embodiment of the storm. Untamed, unstoppable, free. Then she was gone, hooves pounding into the night, leaving only the echo of her laughter trailing on the wind. Ethan returned to the house, where Margaret sat by the fire, her face pale but resolute. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "She's gone. Yes." A long pause. "And what about us?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't know." Margaret turned her gaze to the flames. "Neither do I." The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of wood. The ranch still stood, debts still loomed, life would demand its labor. But the foundation of trust had cracked, and no storm could wash it clean. Ethan sat across from his wife, the space between them wider than the prairie itself. He thought of Isa, wild as the wind, and of Margaret, steady as stone. One had left, the other remained, but both carried pieces of his heart he could never reclaim. Outside, the land breathed under the stars, endless and indifferent. Inside, the fire burned low, its glow catching the worn lines of their faces. Two people bound by vows, broken by choices, yet still tethered by something neither could name. And Ethan knew the storm had passed, but its echo would never truly fade.